If someone had told me that my marriage would collapse quietly, without screaming, without betrayal, without anyone else stepping into the picture, I would have laughed. Because that's never how disasters happen in movies or books. They erupt, they explode, they grab you by the throat. Mine didn't. Mine withered. My husband wanted to divorce me after I became an alcoholic. That's the line I keep replaying in my head, a line that still feels foreign when I whisper it out loud. Not because it isn't true, but because admitting it means admitting I was the one who detonated everything. I was the storm. I was the earthquake. I was the one who made him look at me, his wife, his partner, his supposed equal, and decide he couldn't do it anymore. I didn't know my life was about to shatter the morning he walked into our living room, placed a stack of divorce papers on the coffee table, and said, in a voice that sounded too calm to belong to the man I married, "I can't do this anymore, Maya." I remember blinking at the documents, my head pounding from the night before, the bitter taste of whiskey still coating my tongue. My hand shook when I picked up the papers. Not because I was surprised, but because I wasn't. I had stopped being a wife months before that moment. I had stopped being myself. His mother's death had broken him, and watching him crumble, it cracked something inside me too. Grief hollowed him out. Guilt hollowed me out. And somewhere between me pouring my first drink to steady myself and pouring my 50th to numb everything, I became a woman I didn't recognize. A woman he couldn't stay married to. So I signed the divorce papers. I didn't fight, didn't cry, didn't ask him to stay. I just signed them and handed them back like they were rent receipts. But then, he didn't file them. Not that day, not that week, not ever. Instead, he told me he was waiting, that he wanted me to have enough financial stability before we made anything official. And that was how I ended up sleeping on a mattress in our office room, my exile inside my own home, half wife, half ghost, fully aware that this was the life I had earned. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have imagined, was that those torn months of separation were about to dismantle everything I thought I understood about love, redemption, and what it means to rebuild a marriage from ashes. Before everything fell apart, my life looked respectable, boring even. I'm 29. I work as a civil servant in the municipal government, public works, then later city planning. That kind of job people nod politely at, but never ask follow-up questions about. I am the person in a blazer with a badge, standing at a folding table in a community hall, explaining road closures to angry residents. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable, predictable, solid. So was my marriage. My husband's name is Nolan. He's 33, a bit taller than me, with the kind of quiet presence that makes a room feel less chaotic the moment he walks in. Not loud, not flashy, just steady. He's a financial analyst, the kind of person who genuinely enjoys spreadsheets and color-coded budgets. I used to tease him that his idea of foreplay was updating our joint savings goals. We met at a friend's birthday party, the kind of event where everyone stands around a too-small living room pretending they aren't checking their phones. I remember I was balancing a paper plate of store-bought cake and a plastic cup of cheap wine when I bumped into him. "Sorry," I said, icing smearing onto my thumb. He glanced down, smiled, and handed me a napkin. "You're good. The cake suffered a greater loss than I did." I snorted, which was wildly unflattering, and he grinned like he'd been trying to get exactly that reaction out of me. We started talking. About nothing and everything. Housing prices, bad coffee, city politics, the way the bus was always 5 minutes late when you needed it most. He listened like what I said mattered. That was the first thing I noticed. Not his eyes, not his hands, not his jawline, his attention. A few months later, we were inseparable. A year in, we moved in together. 2 years in, he proposed in the least Instagrammable, but most us way possible. In the kitchen, while we were both in sweatpants, stirring a pot of oversalted soup. "I don't want to do this without you," he said, sliding a simple ring across the counter toward me. His hand was shaking. "Any of it. The boring parts, the hard parts, the Tuesday nights, especially the Tuesday nights." I said yes with tears in my eyes and soup boiling over behind me. Our marriage at first was ordinary in the best way. Shared calendars on the fridge, meal prepping on Sundays, fights about laundry and whose turn it was to take out the trash. We had a running joke that we were middle-aged at heart long before we actually got there. My mother adored him. She was the loud one, the warm one, the kind of woman who could start a conversation with a wall and walk away with its life story. She'd always worried I'd end up with someone cold or controlling, someone who would shut me down. When she met Nolan, she relaxed in a way I hadn't seen since childhood. "He looks at you like you're his home," she whispered to me once in the kitchen, hands deep in a bowl of marinating chicken. "Don't you dare get bored of that." I rolled my eyes. "I'm not you, Mom. I don't self-sabotage for sport." She laughed, but there was a flicker in her gaze I didn't understand at the time. My relationship with my mom was intense. We were close. We talked almost every day, about work, about recipes, about nothing at all. She'd send me photos of half-burnt dinners and caption them with, "See, you got your cooking skills from me." When I had a bad day, she was the one I called first, even before Nolan sometimes. My dad lived abroad, had for years. Our contact was occasional and polite, but distant, so my mother was my anchor, my constant, the person I didn't know how to imagine the world without. Before she got sick, my life followed a rhythm. Work, home, dinner with Nolan, phone call with Mom, Netflix, sleep. Weekends at the market, lunches at her place. She and Nolan would bicker about football and interest rates, while I sat at the table, chin in my palm, feeling like I'd managed to carve out something safe in a world that rarely was. Looking back, there were small things I ignored, like how helpless I felt any time something went wrong with her health, even before the diagnosis. The way my chest tightened every time I saw her name flash on my phone, a flash of fear before I answered. The way Nolan would ask, gently, "Are you okay?" after every conversation, and I'd answer too quickly, "I'm fine." I wasn't fine, but I didn't know that yet. When the word cancer finally entered the room, it didn't crash in with sirens and flashing lights. It slipped quietly between us in a white consulting room, wrapped in clinical language and percentages. My mother squeezed my hand so hard my fingers went numb. "It'll be fine," she said, voice bright and cheerful, like she was comforting me after a bad exam. "We'll get through it. We always do, don't we?" I nodded, because what else was I supposed to do? What I didn't realize then was that her illness wouldn't just change my life. It would dismantle the version of myself I thought was permanent. And that Nolan, the man who had once felt like my safe place, would end up standing on the other side of a locked office door, wondering if his wife still existed somewhere underneath the empty bottles. Grief doesn't walk into your life politely. It leaks in, like water through a crack in the ceiling. Slow at first, almost invisible, until suddenly the entire roof collapses on top of you. When my mother's cancer worsened, that crack widened day by day. I tried to hold myself together, but Nolan saw it happening long before I admitted anything. He'd reach for my hand at night, fingers brushing mine tentatively, and I'd pull away without realizing I was doing it. He'd ask how she was doing, and I'd answer mechanically, like reading from a script. "She's fine. I'm fine. It's all fine." It wasn't fine, but I had decided that if I held everything tightly enough, grief, fear, hope, it couldn't spill out and drown me. The night she died, Nolan held me so tightly my ribs hurt. I cried until I couldn't breathe, then fell asleep in his arms. The next morning, I woke up feeling hollow, like someone had scooped out everything soft and replaced it with fog. The first drink came later that week, a glass of wine to calm down, then another because the first didn't do anything. Then vodka, because wine felt too slow. Then whiskey, because it felt warm and sharp, like a slap that I desperately needed. Nolan noticed immediately. Of course he did. But at first, he didn't scold. He didn't judge. He just watched me with this heartbreaking mix of worry and helplessness. "Maya," he said softly one night as I poured a second drink at 6 p.m., "maybe we should—" "I don't want to talk," I snapped. Too harsh. Too fast. He stepped back like I'd slapped him. That became our pattern. He'd approach. I'd shut down. He'd try to talk. I'd pour another drink. He'd ask if I wanted help. I'd tell him I didn't need any. My internal monologue had turned into something cruel. "You're fine. Stop being weak. Don't burden him. Don't fall apart. Just hold it together. Just drink enough to keep breathing." But grief is greedy. It doesn't like being managed. It wants to consume. Within months, my drinking went from coping to spiraling. I started missing work, then coming in late, then avoiding responsibilities altogether. Dishes piled up. Laundry went unwashed. Nolan cooked, cleaned, gently reminded me to shower, to eat. Things I should have been doing. Things he shouldn't have had to. But I hated myself for the weakness, and hatred has a way of spilling outward. I snapped at him constantly. For little things. For nothing at all. He'd ask, "Can we try talking to someone? A therapist? A grief counselor?" And I'd bite back, I'm not crazy, Nolan. I don't need a stranger fixing me. He'd reach for my hand. I'd pull away. He'd leave a plate of food for me. I'd let it go cold. He'd try to love me. I'd shut the door in his face emotionally, sometimes literally. The worst part? I forgot his birthday. Completely. No card, no dinner, no acknowledgement. Just a mumbled, "Why are you so quiet tonight?" as he sat across from me, with a look that told me he'd been waiting, hoping for me to remember. Then our anniversary passed the same way. He didn't yell, he didn't demand. He just folded into himself piece by piece. And still I drank. At some point, Nolan stopped trying. Not fully, not dramatically, but gradually, subtly. His voice softened until it barely existed. He spent more time in his office. He slept on the far side of the bed. He smiled less, asked less, expected less. The distance between us grew into something enormous. I didn't see the shift clearly then, not through the haze of alcohol and denial, but now, looking back, that was the moment the floor began to crack beneath our marriage. The morning he placed divorce papers on the coffee table wasn't the breaking point. It was simply the day the breaking became visible. The night before it happened, I passed out on the living room couch with an open bottle beside me and the TV still humming blue light across the walls. I don't remember what I was watching. I don't remember getting there. I don't even remember what I drank. What I do remember, painfully, vividly, is the sound of footsteps the next morning. Slow, measured, heavy in a way Nolan's footsteps had never been. I blinked awake, my tongue dry, my head pounding so hard it felt like my skull was vibrating. I lifted my cheek from the cold leather cushion and pushed myself up just in time to see him standing in the doorway. He was holding a stack of papers. His eyes weren't red or angry. They weren't sad either. They were resigned. And that terrified me more than any explosion of emotion could have. If he had yelled, I could have yelled back. If he had cried, I could have apologized. But resignation? That meant he was done. "Maya," he said quietly, "we need to talk." Something cold settled in my stomach. "What's that?" My voice was hoarse. I already knew the answer. He stepped closer and placed the papers on the coffee table, right beside the bottle I hadn't bothered to cap. "It's divorce paperwork," he said. "I talked to a lawyer." The room tilted slightly. My heartbeat stumbled. I stared at the papers like they were written in another language. "You already filled everything out?" He nodded. I swallowed hard. "Since when?" "A week," he said. "Maybe longer. I've been thinking about this for months." He wasn't raising his voice. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't lecturing. He was speaking like someone who had been rehearsing every word for a long, long time. Months. Months of him watching me self-destruct. Months of him sleeping beside a stranger. Months of him preparing for a future without me. My throat tightened. "Why now?" I whispered. He glanced at the empty bottle, then at me. Not judgmental, just tired. Bone tired. "Because I don't know who you are anymore," he murmured. "And I don't think you do either." I looked down at my shaking hands. The divorce papers sat between us like a gravestone. "Do you want to talk about this?" I asked softly, barely able to breathe. "Talking hasn't helped us in a long time," he said. "You don't listen. You don't want help. And I can't keep living like this." His voice cracked on the last word. That was the worst part. The tiny fracture that revealed just how long he'd been holding himself together. Something inside me crumbled. "So that's it?" I whispered. "You're done?" He didn't look away. "I'm exhausted, Maya. I can't fix this alone." I didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't beg. Maybe I should have. Maybe a healthier version of me would have. Instead, numbness washed over every nerve in my body, cool and heavy like anesthesia. I picked up the papers. My name was typed neatly at the top, printed cleanly beside his. Maya Bennett. Nolan Bennett. It looked so official, so final, so inevitable. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages. Everything had been handled. Property division, accounts, living arrangements. All I had to do was sign where the yellow tabs marked. I asked him one last thing. "Is this really what you want?" He hesitated, not long, but long enough that I saw the shadow of pain behind his eyes. "I don't know what else to do," he whispered. That was the truth. The ugly, heartbreaking truth. He wasn't leaving because he wanted to. He was leaving because he didn't know how to stay. My mouth tasted like metal. My vision blurred, though I didn't cry. "Okay," I said quietly. I picked up the pen, and I signed. Every line, every page, every part of the life we had built. He didn't stop me. He didn't reach for my hand. He just watched silently, his jaw tense, his fingers curled into fists at his sides. When I finished, I placed the pen down gently beside the papers. He took the documents without a word, turned, and walked toward the bedroom. The same bedroom where we had once curled into each other every night, where we had whispered secrets and planned futures and laughed ourselves breathless. I didn't call after him. I didn't have the right, because in that moment, hungover, hollow, and sitting in my own wreckage, I believed I deserved every piece of this ending. Of course, what happened afterward made absolutely no sense to me then, because Nolan didn't file the papers. Not that day, not that week, not ever. And the reason he gave, it would break me in an entirely different way. For a few days after signing the divorce papers, I floated through the house like a ghost. Nolan moved quietly, deliberately, keeping a polite distance as if I were a fragile object that might crack under pressure. In a way, I already had. I expected him to file the papers immediately. I expected a slammed door, a final conversation, a moment when he'd tell me when he was moving out, or when I should. Instead, nothing happened. He placed the documents in a folder, put the folder on his desk, and went on with his day. By the third morning, I couldn't take it anymore. He was making coffee when I finally asked, "Why haven't you filed them?" He didn't look up from the mug he was pouring. "I'm waiting." "For what?" He exhaled slowly, shoulders tense. "For your inheritance to go through. I want to make sure you have money to get your own place before everything becomes official." I stared at him. Of all the explanations I had braced myself for, that wasn't even on the list. "You're waiting so I won't struggle financially?" I whispered. He nodded. "You may not want my help anymore, but I'm not throwing you out with nothing." A strange ache bloomed in my chest. Pain mixed with shame, mixed with something softer I didn't want to name. He was done being my husband, but he wasn't done being decent. I felt something twist painfully inside me. "I don't need you to take care of me," I said, my voice breaking in places. He finally met my eyes. "You haven't taken care of yourself in a long time, Maya." I dropped my gaze to the kitchen counter. The truth in his words stung, even though he said them gently. That afternoon, he suggested I move into the office room, the room we used to call the guest office, but almost never used. It wasn't a demand. He didn't frame it as punishment. He simply said, "I think we need space." And I agreed, because how could I argue with the man I'd already pushed away? I dragged in a mattress, sheets, a blanket that smelled faintly of lavender from the linen closet. When I closed the door that first night, it hit me. This would be my room now. Not our bedroom, not our shared space. Mine, alone. The mattress felt thin, the air felt cold, the silence felt loud. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering how I had ended up here, wondering if somewhere along the way I could have stopped the spiral before it became an avalanche. What did I miss? Where did I fail? How did I become this version of myself? The questions rotated through my skull endlessly. I wanted to be angry, at grief, at fate, at life, at him. But the only person I could reasonably blame was myself. In the morning, I opened my eyes to a trash bag filled with empty bottles in the corner of the room. The sight made something inside me recoil. God, what had I become? Days passed. Weeks. We lived like polite strangers sharing a house. Nolan would cook dinner and quietly leave a plate for me in the fridge. I did laundry and folded his shirts neatly, placing them outside the bedroom door like careful offerings. We exchanged nods in hallways, small words in the kitchen, nothing more. But the silence wasn't cruel, it was heavy, wounded, waiting. One night, Nolan knocked on the office door. Just a soft, hesitant tap. I opened it to find him standing there, arms crossed loosely, expression unreadable. "Are you doing all this to win me back?" he asked. I froze. "Doing what?" "The chores, being sober, showing up to work. You're different." I swallowed hard. My pulse fluttered in my neck. "No," I lied. "I'm doing it for myself." He held my gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "That's good," he said quietly. "I'm glad." He walked away. The moment the door closed, I pressed my forehead against it and let out a shaky breath. Because the truth? I was doing it for him, for us, for a version of myself I hoped still existed somewhere beneath the rubble. But admitting that would have made me vulnerable, and vulnerability had begun to feel like a luxury I no longer deserved. So I bottled the truth the way I used to bottle grief, tightly, desperately, foolishly. And somewhere in that tightness, a small piece of me began to change. It wasn't enough. It wasn't fast, but it was a beginning. Months passed in a strange, muted rhythm, two parallel lives unfolding under one roof, brushing edges but never fully touching. I stayed sober. I threw myself into work. I cleaned every corner of the house like I was scrubbing guilt out of the tiles. I showed Nolan that I could be dependable again, even if the word dependable tasted unfamiliar on my tongue. But recovery wasn't linear, not emotionally. Every day I woke with a quiet sense of dread, a fear that Nolan would finally file the divorce papers, that he'd announce he found an apartment, that he'd ask me to leave. Every time he walked into a room, a tremor of fear ran through me. Not because he was dangerous, but because I was terrified he would finally give up. He didn't come closer either. We lived in the in-between, not married, not divorced, not lovers, not enemies. Just two people who once loved each other deeply, now orbiting cautiously like planets afraid of collision. Then things shifted. It began subtly, small glances, lingering silences, doorways where we almost spoke but didn't. Then, one night in month 9, after so much distance I had forgotten the shape of his warmth, Nolan knocked on my door at nearly midnight. "Maya?" His voice was soft, uncertain. I sat up in bed, heart racing. "Yeah?" He opened the door just enough to meet my eyes. "Would you sleep in the bedroom tonight? Not for anything else. Just company." The vulnerability in his voice nearly broke me. "Yes," I whispered. When I slid into the bed beside him, it felt both familiar and foreign. The sheets smelled like him. The mattress dipped under his weight. The air between us trembled. We didn't touch, not at first. We lay inches apart, breathing quietly, the dark filled with memories of better versions of ourselves. After 10 minutes, he shifted closer. His arm brushed mine, then gently, slowly, he draped it across my chest. I inhaled sharply, overwhelmed by the tenderness of that small gesture. We slept like that, wrapped softly around each other, not reclaiming love, but remembering it. It became a quiet pattern. Maybe once a week, sometimes twice, he'd knock on my door and ask me to join him. Sometimes he'd hold my hand. Sometimes he'd rest his forehead against mine. Sometimes we didn't touch at all. But each time, something inside me softened. Something inside him did too. Through the holidays, the tension between us became something fragile and hopeful. Christmas was quiet, no gifts, no big gestures, just the two of us cooking together, brushing hands accidentally as we reached for spices, occasionally catching each other's eyes and looking away too quickly. On New Year's Eve, we stayed up until midnight. When the countdown reached 0, he pulled me into his arms, not out of obligation, but with a softness that felt almost sacred. "Happy New Year, Maya," he murmured. I clung to him like he might vanish, because despite the moments of closeness, uncertainty still gnawed at me. Every time he smiled at me, a voice in my head whispered, "You don't deserve this." Every time he touched my hand, I wondered if he'd regret it the next day. Then came the night everything cracked open. It was New Year's Day. We sat in the living room, quietly sipping tea. The house was still, peaceful in a way that felt delicate. "I need to tell you something," I said. He set his mug down and looked at me carefully. "Okay." I took a breath. "When I got sober, when I started fixing myself, I told you I did it for me. But that wasn't the full truth." His eyebrows lifted. "I did it for you," I whispered. "For us, because I wanted to prove to you that I wasn't the person I had become. I knew it wasn't fair to put that on you, so I hid it. But I need you to know." He didn't answer, not at first. Instead, he stood, walked to the bedroom, and returned with something clasped in his hands. The divorce papers. The same papers I had signed more than a year ago. He placed them on this coffee table, right where he had put them the day our marriage fell apart. "What do you think we should do with these?" he asked quietly. My throat closed. My heart slammed against my ribs. I reached for the papers, hands trembling, and tore them in half. Then again, and again, until the pieces were nothing but confetti of our almost ending. When I looked up, Nolan's eyes were wet. "Yes," he choked out. "Yes." He slid beside me on the couch and wrapped his arms around me, holding me like he was afraid I'd disappear. I cried into his shoulder, not out of sadness, but relief so intense it was almost painful. He kissed the top of my head, whispered, "It's okay," again and again. That night we slept in the same bed, not as ghosts, not as strangers, but as two people trying to rebuild something shattered. But the moment hope returned, fear rushed in. I lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling long after he fell asleep. My thoughts spun faster and faster. What if I wasn't ready? What if I failed again? What if he regretted this? What if I hurt him again? The panic grew until it filled every corner of my mind. By morning, I looked exhausted. Nolan noticed immediately. "You okay?" he asked gently. I lied. Yeah, just didn't sleep well. But the truth clawed at me for days. The guilt, the fear, the overwhelming pressure of being given a second chance I wasn't sure I deserved. He kept asking if something was wrong. I kept denying it, until he finally sat me down and said, "If we're going to try again, we can't hide from each other anymore." His voice was steady, but mine trembled as I whispered the truth. I'm scared. Scared of losing him. Scared of hurting him. Scared of being myself again. What followed would reshape our marriage entirely. Telling him the truth didn't feel like relief. It felt like unraveling. Once the words slipped out, "I'm scared," everything I had been holding together with mental duct tape began falling apart in slow, painful pieces. Nolan sat across from me on the couch, elbows on his knees, hands clasped, eyes soft but steady. I hated that look. It made me feel seen, too seen. And being seen meant being vulnerable. And vulnerability was the very thing I had been avoiding since the day my mother died. "What are you scared of?" he asked gently. My throat tightened. "Everything." His eyebrows pulled together, but he didn't interrupt. "I was so certain we were getting divorced," I whispered. I planned my entire future around it. I had been looking at apartments, wondering where I'd spend weekends, figuring out how to live alone. My voice cracked. "I had already accepted that you wouldn't be in my life anymore. And now suddenly you are, and I don't know how to adjust." He inhaled slowly, like he could feel the weight of the confession settling between us. "Maya," he began. But once the dam cracked, everything spilled out. "What if I ruin this again? What if I'm not enough? What if you wake up one morning and regret giving me another chance? What if—" "Maya," he said again, more firmly this time. But I couldn't stop. "I don't trust myself yet," I admitted in a whisper. "I'm terrified of hurting you again. I'm terrified of becoming that person again." He leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment as if absorbing every ounce of what I had just said. When he opened them again, something in his expression had shifted. Less confusion, more heartbreak. "I wish you'd told me sooner," he murmured. And then he cried. Not loud, dramatic sobs. Quiet, exhausted tears, like a man who had held everything inside for too long. Tears that weren't angry, but mournful. Mournful for the marriage we had lost, the pain we'd inflicted on each other, the months of silence and distance and unspoken fear. "I've been scared too," he admitted, wiping his face. "I've been terrified this whole time. I didn't know if you even wanted me anymore." We spent an entire week talking every night, long, raw conversations that peeled back every layer we had carefully avoided. He told me how abandoned he felt during my drinking. I told him how drowning I had felt, how grief had hollowed me out until alcohol filled the empty spaces. He confessed how he would lie awake listening for the sound of me breathing on the couch because he was afraid I'd choke in my sleep. I confessed how every time he pulled away emotionally, it felt like punishment I had earned. We didn't scream, we didn't throw accusations. We just sat with the heaviness, letting it settle over us like dust. One night, he asked me the question that nearly destroyed me. "Did you ever stop loving me?" I held his gaze. "No," I whispered, "but I stopped being able to show it." Then I asked him the same question. He took a long breath. "No," he said softly, "but I stopped knowing how to reach you." That should have felt like progress. It should have made things lighter. But instead, it made everything heavier. Because after all the confessions, after all the truth, after all the shared vulnerability, I felt worse. Not because of him, because of me. Every word he spoke was a reminder of the damage I had caused. Every tear he shed was something I had put in his eyes. Every night he told me he cried alone in our bed while I passed out on the couch, a knife twisted inside me. The shame became suffocating. I couldn't forgive myself, not fully, not even partially. And self-forgiveness is something no one else can do for you. The lowest point came one night when I couldn't sleep. Again. Nolan had fallen asleep beside me, breathing softly, peaceful in a way I hadn't seen in so long. I watched him, feeling like an intruder in my own marriage, like I didn't deserve to be lying next to him, like this wasn't my place anymore. So I got up quietly and slipped out of the bedroom, padding back into the office room, the room where I had spent all those lonely months. I sat on the edge of the worn mattress and stared at the wall in the dark. I thought I had hit rock bottom once before, but this feeling of being undeserving, even of the progress I had made, felt deeper, darker, heavier, lonelier. For the first time since getting sober, I wondered if Nolan's life would have been easier if the divorce had gone through, if I had signed those papers and walked out of his life permanently, if staying was selfish. That was the darkest moment of all, the moment I questioned whether my presence in his life was a gift or a burden. And the terrifying thing? I didn't know the answer. The night I sat alone in the office room, the same room where I had once slept on a thin mattress feeling like a stranger in my own home, I realized something had shifted, not between Nolan and me, inside me. I had been sober for months. I had rebuilt habits, routines, responsibilities. I had earned back trust, piece by fragile piece. Yet my mind was still treating me like the woman who passed out on the couch surrounded by empty bottles. The woman I used to be, not the one I was now. Something was wrong, and for the first time, I allowed myself to consider the possibility that it wasn't just emotional. A few nights later, Nolan found me sitting alone in the living room at 3 a.m., staring at nothing. "Maya," he whispered, voice thick with worry, "you haven't slept in days." I inhaled sharply. I can't shut my brain off. Every thought is a warning. Every memory is a reminder of how badly I screwed up. It just won't stop. He sat beside me slowly, carefully, like approaching a wounded animal. "You're doing everything right," he murmured. "So why do you think the worst?" "I don't know," I whispered. "I wish I did." He studied me for a long moment, then said something completely unexpected. "I think you should talk to a doctor." I stiffened. "I don't need therapy." "I'm not talking about therapy." His tone was gentle but firm. "I mean a medical doctor, someone who can run blood work." I blinked at him, confused. "Blood work?" "Yes," he nodded. "My cousin went through something similar. The constant negative thoughts, the spiraling, the panic. It wasn't just emotional, it was chemical. Her doctor found imbalances that were messing with her brain. The idea seemed absurd, illogical, impossible. Chemical? Like a medical issue? Not moral failure? Not character weakness? Not proof that I was broken? "Just get checked," he said, touching my hand lightly. "If everything's normal, then we'll keep figuring this out. Together." The word together nearly made me cry. I agreed, not because I believed anything was chemically wrong, but because Nolan looked like he'd keep worrying until I did. The blood test results came 2 weeks later. A doctor sat across from me in a small clinic office, fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. "Several of your levels are off," he explained, tapping a chart. "This pattern is common after prolonged stress, trauma, and substance dependence." My heartbeat stuttered. He continued, "Your brain essentially got stuck in crisis mode. Even though your external circumstances improved, your neurochemistry hasn't recalibrated." My mouth fell open slightly. "So, I'm not just broken?" "Not broken," he said firmly. "Your brain needs help catching up." He prescribed medication to regulate my mood and stabilize my thought patterns. I walked out of the clinic with the prescription in my trembling hands, the weight of the past year suddenly reframed. Maybe my anxiety, my sleepless nights, my self-loathing weren't proof of my worthlessness. Maybe they were symptoms. The change was almost immediate. Within 2 days of taking the medication, the constant intrusive thoughts, the icy whispers of, "You're a failure, you'll ruin everything, you don't deserve him," went completely silent. Not quieter, silent. I woke one morning and realized I had slept through the entire night. When I rolled over to see Nolan sleeping beside me, I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel the urge to run or hide. I just felt present, alive, normal in a way I hadn't in over a year. That morning, Nolan woke to find me watching him with a softness I hadn't been able to feel in months. "Hey," he murmured, brushing sleep from his eyes. "You okay?" For the first time in a long time, I whispered, "Yes." I told him everything, the doctor's explanation, the imbalances, the medication. He listened, then exhaled shakily. "Maya, I'm proud of you." Tears stung my eyes. "Thank you for pushing me to get help." "I didn't push," he corrected gently. "I guided. You walked on your own." It was the first time I let myself believe I had truly changed. Not for him, not for anyone else. For me. That night, when he kissed me, I didn't pull away. For months, he had kept his distance, waiting for me to step toward him instead of running from myself. And now, with the fog finally clearing, I could. We were intimate again. Not frantic or desperate, but slow, tender, grounded. The kind of intimacy that feels like rediscovering a language you used to speak fluently. After, I rested my head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "I want our marriage to work," I whispered. He stroked my hair. I never stopped wanting that. And for the first time since my mother's death, I believed him. Fully, deeply, without fear clawing at the back of my mind. That was the night our marriage stopped dying. And the night I stopped dying with it. When my mind finally quieted, everything else in my life began to take shape again. My marriage, my work, my routines, my sense of self. It felt like waking up after a long winter, sunlight touching my skin for the first time in months. But the world around us didn't adjust as quickly as we did. Healing might happen inside a home, but fallout happens everywhere else. Returning home. When Nolan's temporary assignment in the capital ended, we packed our things, left the small apartment we had lived in for 2 months, and drove back to our house, our real house, the one that had held every phase of our marriage, the joy, the grief, the silence, the almost ending. This time, when we walked through the front door, it didn't feel like a battlefield. It felt like a place to rebuild. I had the week off before returning to my normal duties at the city office. Nolan and I spent those days working on my mother's house, the one she left me, the one I had once considered selling. Now it was becoming something else, something alive. Our weekend escape. I watched Nolan kneel in the garden, my mother's overgrown, chaotic garden, replacing wilted roots with herbs, flowers, vegetables. He wiped sweat from his forehead, leaving a streak of dirt across his cheek. When he caught me smiling at him, he grinned back. And in that small moment, I saw it. The man I married. The man I almost lost. The man who didn't give up on me, even when he should have. But healing isn't clean. It stirs up dust, and dust settles everywhere. People talk. Family talks even louder. Nolan's sister messaged him first. I saw your promotion pictures online. Why is Maya suddenly acting like everything is fine? She almost ruined your life. He didn't reply to her, not because he was avoiding conflict, but because he was done letting people speak about me like I was a monster. Then his father called, offering unsolicited advice. You sure this reconciliation is wise? Once a drunk, always a drunk. Nolan's voice went cold. Dad, don't call again if you're going to disrespect my wife. He hung up. I wasn't in the room when it happened, but I knew from the tightness of his jaw afterward. I knew from the way he came into the kitchen, wrapped his arms around me from behind, and whispered into my shoulder, You're not who they think you are. It didn't fix everything, but it eased the ache. Rebuilding routine. When I returned to the city office after leave, coworkers approached me cautiously. They all remembered the version of me who had once stumbled through hallways, who had missed deadlines, who had shown up foggy-eyed and brittle. But that woman was gone. Now I arrived early. I completed tasks ahead of schedule. I spoke clearly, decisively, with confidence. I even laughed again, a real laugh, not the hollow imitation I'd lived on for months. My supervisor handed me new long-term assignments. My colleagues congratulated me on Nolan's promotion. They asked about the capital project, about our travel, about my mother's house renovations. No one mentioned the divorce papers. Not directly, not openly, but I saw the flickers in their eyes. Curiosity, surprise, maybe even disbelief. People love redemption stories. They just don't always believe them. The last ghost of the past. One evening, while reorganizing my mother's old bedroom closet, I found her perfume, still half full. I opened the bottle, and the scent hit me like a wave, warm, floral, comforting. I sank to the floor and cried for the first time in months. Not the spiraling, panicked tears I used to cry, but clean tears, tears of release. Nolan found me there. He sat beside me, touching my back gently. Bad moment? He asked. No, I whispered. Just a necessary one. I leaned into his shoulder, and he kissed the top of my head, the same place he kissed the day my mother died. But this time the grief didn't drown me. It layered itself gently in the background, no longer a force tearing me apart, but a reminder of how far I'd come. The shift between us. As weeks passed, Nolan and I fell into a new rhythm. Not the autopilot rhythm of our early marriage, something more intentional. We communicated, really communicated. We listened, without reacting defensively. We apologized when needed. We expressed gratitude. We checked in emotionally. The intimacy returned fully, naturally. The spark between us wasn't frantic or desperate. It was grounded, steady, and deeply connected. Every touch felt earned, cherished, understood. One night, lying beside him in my mother's newly finished bedroom, he whispered, Maya, I want to try for a baby soon, when you're ready. My breath caught. Really? Yeah, he said, brushing hair from my face. I want a family with you. I've always wanted that. Tears blurred my vision. For the first time, I felt truly capable of being someone's mother. I want that too, I whispered. Not because I needed redemption, not because I felt obligated, but because I felt whole enough to choose it. when the world sees the truth. People expected Nolan's anger to simmer. People expected our marriage to remain fractured. People expected us to fail quietly and predictably. But instead, they watched our lives stabilize. They watched our partnership strengthen. They watched the two of us, once broken, become better than we had ever been. And the unspoken judgments people threw at me? They only reflected what they didn't understand. Healing isn't about forgetting what broke you. It's about learning how to build something stronger from the shattered pieces. Nolan didn't save me. I didn't save him. We chose each other again. And that choice created its own kind of gravity, pulling us forward. And in the end, the fallout didn't destroy us. It cleared the path. There's a moment, after a storm finally passes, when the world feels strangely still. Not silent, just calmer, softer, like everything has been rinsed clean. That's what my life feels like now. Not perfect, not magically fixed, just mine again. When I wake up next to Nolan now, it doesn't feel like fear. It doesn't feel like guilt. It feels like partnership, something I didn't know how to appreciate when I was drowning. I reach for his hand, not because I'm seeking reassurance, but because I actually want to hold it. When he smiles at me, I don't tense up waiting for disappointment. I smile back. When I look at my reflection, I don't see the woman who hit rock bottom. I see the woman who climbed out. Slowly, painfully, honestly. Our marriage isn't a fairy tale. It isn't a dramatic reunion or a miraculous salvation. It's two people meeting each other for the second time, older, wiser, more aware of how fragile love can be if left unattended. The truth is this: I didn't rebuild our marriage. I rebuilt myself, and that changed everything else. Nolan didn't rescue me from my grief. He stood beside me while I learned how to walk again. The medication stabilized my mind, but the strength to take it, to seek answers, came from the part of me that still believed I deserved healing. For the first time, I let myself believe that being helped wasn't the same as being weak. My mother's house, our escape house, is almost done now. The garden is blooming. The bedroom is warm and bright. Nolan jokes that the roses grow better when I talk to them. And maybe he's right. Maybe plants know when someone is learning how to live again. Sometimes when we're out there weeding or painting or cooking dinner with the windows open, he'll glance at me with this quiet certainty, as if he knew all along we'd find our way back. And maybe he did, because loving someone is not about being perfect. It's about choosing them every day, even on the days when they can't choose themselves. We're talking about trying for a baby soon, not because we're trying to fix anything, but because our future feels like something we finally get to build instead of fear. If I've learned anything from this past year, it's this: healing doesn't make you who you used to be. It makes you someone new, someone stronger, someone softer, someone real. And love, real love, doesn't avoid the darkness. It walks into it and stays. So this is where my story settles for now. Not in a dramatic finale, not in fireworks or grand gestures, but in two people choosing to stay, choosing to grow, choosing to love without fear. And maybe that's the quiet miracle of it all. If you're watching this, I want you to remember something. You are not ruined by the hardest version of yourself. You are rebuilt by the version choosing to rise.